Now we're going to get right into the next one, which is along the same lines, Hello Future, navigating the Web3 paradigm with blockchain, AI, and Hedera. I'm joined by our highly esteemed speaker, Morrow, who's an independent director on the board of Hedera. Please give her a big round of applause.
Thank
Get
you.
started.
So I feel that the previous panel actually set me up for this keynote. So a few things. How many of you have heard of Hedera? Right, a lot, quite a few. That's great. A few tidbits about me. First and foremost, I'm going to go back here before we go. Is that I'm a dual citizen, so I live in Switzerland. I'm Swiss and U.S., so that's kind of an interesting tidbit. I row. I'm in a rotor club, so that's a great tidbit also. And I was first nominated to the board by DLA Piper. DLA Piper is a member of the council, and then I was reelected by Zane. I'm going to come from it from an angle of the enterprise side, right? The enterprises are already adopting this. They're already members of the council. As a board member, I'm ensconced, I serve the council. So let me kind of give you a little bit of history here of who we are, where we're going, a little bit of personal history too. I like to add a little bit of personal rather, because it's my journey too, right? And also, yes, there's an AI component, and we partner with a group out of Stanford University that does really pretty good work in this space. So a little bit. This is, when we're looking at kind of the evolution, we have to think about it from perspective of how we have been on this journey, from problems we have to solve. Let me argue with you that companies care about friction and revenue. They care about, you cannot go to a CEO and say, what if I do something like blah. They need to understand the friction. But so here's kind of where we're at, and now we're looking at some kind of component of a trust era. Trust is everything in the discussion that we have today, everything. And so you have layer ones, and I will argue, by the way, we play all really fine in the nice sandbox together. I think there's a lot of room for issues and that needs to be resolved, and especially when we're talking about this notion of centralization, decentralization. In Hedera, we do have a governance model, which I will talk about. We do have somebody who talks to regulators, who talks to the government. She used to serve as policy at Meta. So we have that kind of component here in our discussion. And so there's a lot of things that we have to look at it from a performance perspective. We heard about performance. Security is very, very important. Security is very important. Stability, governance, and sustainability. Sustainability, particularly from an environmental perspective. So security, one point that I'd like to make, if you haven't heard about DRECalliance.org, I encourage you to go and look and be a member. That's the Decentralized Recovery Alliance, founded by one of the creators of Hashgraph, Dr. Lehman Baird, Algorand, and Ripple just became a member. So this is really important when we're talking about lost keys, et cetera, on the security component. So that's one aspect that we need to look at. Treasury management is very, very key. So there's all kinds of things that we need to solve for. My journey started out in 2009, kind of in that space, Bitcoin. I needed to understand what I don't know. So this was an interesting journey for me, and I went off and got one of the first master's degrees offered in this space, which was digital currency and blockchain from the University of Nicosia. How many of you heard of that? This is a very, very interesting space. So I went off and I did that work. I programmed in Solidity, which is an interesting work. And now we're looking at it from a web perspective, really around from the enterprise side of the house. Hashgraph itself, this is the only geek slide you're going to see here. If you really want to geek, talk to Dr. Lehman Baird, because he will really take you down a good path. He created this. all right? It's different. It's a gossip protocol, far different than we talk about blockchain. You could argue that it is sort of like probably a new DLT, a new distributed ledger technology, right, component. But it's a different space here. And Lehman, who is a scientist, by the way, he served in the Air Force, he's taught at the Air Force Academy. He's a scientist. He did his work, PhD at Carnegie Mellon University. He thinks very differently. He wants to take you down a path of the possibilities, the art of possible that these technologies can solve for. And so this is where we have to think about what do we need to look at from a sustainability perspective in terms of electricity, proof of work, proof of stake, proof of X, proof of Y. What does that mean? What are the issues that you care about when you go and talk to, you go to COP? You look at the sustainability groups. What are you doing in this particular space? How are you handling these issues? And in fact, there was a study done by the University College London, and you can download the study on energy usage, right? On this space and the comparison heretofore. It is an interesting study that UCL had, this is now not me talking, it is actually research that has been done and has been actually published. And so when you're talking about that space, that's why I wear this here. We care about sustainability from a UN perspective, then we need to understand it, right? This I want to spend a little time on, because this is where the council is. This is where it's all at. The magic is here. On the governance side, you see members. They're called enterprises. Aberdeen, you talked about real-world asset tokenization. Well, that's the #1 priority. If you are not, I just came from New York. This is a strategy that is top of mind in the finance perspective, in the finance world. You have Dell, you have DBS, you have UCL, Zane. New here is Mondelez. Mondelez just joined. It's usually 39 groups. We're probably up to 32 and have a pipeline here from the enterprise perspective. When the enterprise joins, they care about a use case they need to be solved for. They come in with, can we use these sets of technologies? Can we use this to solve Hashgraph, to solve for a friction? That's what they do. That's their entry point. So this is not, they have their use cases. The board serves them. Here, you have various groups that are coming in, serving from the development community. Sort of that community from a consumer, from a sustainability, and up here, real-world assets, as I pointed out, that perspective. And then we have also, loyalty. And then, to satisfy the SEC, you have to be Securities Exchange in the United States. You have to be decentralized. You know that. This is an issue. When you're talking about regulatory, that's why we have a policy person based in Washington talking with both parties, et cetera. Talking with government officials, and we'll be at Point Zero conference in Zurich, which is around central banks and regulators. So we have, from an engineering perspective, products perspective is Swirls Labs, as they're SL for short, Swirls Labs, right? You have the foundations, the Hashgraph Association, which is based in Pfäffikon, Schwyz, in Switzerland. You have the DLT Science Foundation. They're based in London. They do a lot of research. They're the research arm, and they do it on a neutral ground. They don't care who you are. They have to have neutrality in this space, right? You have the HBAR Foundation. The HBAR Foundation is where the sustainability fund is. That portfolio is over $100 million US. That's a big fund, right? And they do a lot of other areas. So this group for sustainability is very important with the startup community, particularly. And then you have different types of wallets. and explorers. So it's a big group here. And we just had our meeting in, as I said before, in New York this past week, and lots going on in the space. So we have pretty much groups and organizations covered from all parts of the world, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Middle East and the Americas. As a matter of fact, the CFO comes from Mexico. So this is important to note, that this is kind of when you take a hash graph, it's this kind of ecosystem that we're working with. So a little bit now about some of the examples and use cases that we think about. You have, one is around customer loyalty. It's a problem, an interesting issue. It's Karate Kid. The Karate Combat. So this is about fans and sports and how to actually induce more engagement. And this is through the HBAR Foundation, so they have a lot of engagement in this particular space. We will also think that gaming is probably interesting, very interesting, that's coming up. You'll hear more probably in the press around the gaming areas. And they're looking at non-fungible tokens and probably predictable fees. It's kind of a space that folks are very bold about, and kind of the examples that we see from, or attestation that we see from the CEO of Karate Combat. You just heard in the previous panel about real-world asset tokenization. Aberdeen is a member. In fact, it's a very big priority. And so, with the reason why they come in is exactly what Duncan says here, Duncan Moore, his colleague out of London. And he believes that this is going to be critical for their space around fund management. So I think that's something that is important to note here and across the platforms. And they're looking at tokenization. When we're looking at real-world asset tokenization, by the way, tokenization can be IPR tokenization. It could be your IP tokenization. It could be your ownership on tokenization. So these are issues that they care about deeply. And so reason why they come here is they believe strongly that there is a democratization of investment assets. And so that's an area that we know that is pretty much of a priority from their perspective. The other one is AI. Well, we work with Equity Lab. Equity Lab also has a work that they've done with sustainability. They are an AI group. In fact, they look at how they deal with their modeling. They're originally out of Stanford, and they do quite a bit of interesting work that is really, from an industry perspective, around other aspects than business. And one of them can be around conflict zones. One of them can be around that type of thing. So they actually have come up with they have a solution, by the way. You can go look it up, Equity Lab. In fact, it's demonstrable. You can see it. This is not theory. You can actually look at it. So we work with them, and in terms of why we do that is because there is a model that we can think about in terms of this intersectionality between DLT, blockchain, and AI, and the concerns that people will have around it. One of it is you don't want garbage in, garbage out, looking at how you deal with machine learning. One of the things around the promise for those who code from an AI perspective is to think about the lines and lines of code. And maybe this deals with a certain level of automation that could possibly occur in the space. Again, something that we could think about. But anyway, they are our partner, and they work very, very closely with us, with the Hedera group. The other area is Starling Lab, part of the same group from Equity Lab. And Starling is looking at, again, how they verify your human history, if you will. Again, the same group that came out of Stanford also created Equity Lab, right? And so that's an interesting space that they've been working on from a perspective. We kind of look at it from different models. One is from the enterprise perspective. The other is to invite more from the developmental perspective. The other is stablecoin. So Stablecoin Studio is a product, is interesting, because now you're looking at stablecoin for carriers, stablecoin for telcos. Hedera is a member of the GSMA, as is Telcoin, and we work with the GSMA in looking at how you define a stablecoin for telco carrier perspective. What does that mean? And the next work is going to be tokenization for carriers. These are examples, but this is Stablecoin Studio, and it does exist. So you can see kind of the evolution of the product space, the evolution of the problems that we're all trying to solve in this particular community. Guardian is the ESG. This is the space that has the sustainability fund. These are the people who speak at COP. These are the people who really care about tokenizing and tokenization in the environment. They are very, very focused in this area. We work collaboratively, we try to work, I say try because you want to have some level of decentralization, but you also have to know what the other group is doing. So these are the people who care about what they're doing in sustainability. And so for companies, they want to know that. Who in your group is working on sustainability? Who can a company like ServiceNow go to and speak about that? And they are here. EDF is also in the space, and EDF is looking at the decentralized markets, particularly in energy, and they're looking at particularly around renewable energy credits. And they work very closely with the Guardian team. So this is kind of the sustainability story that you hear from companies. They want to know how to deal with that. And these are their attestations. These are their areas that they are working very much in this particular space. The other is Holosystems. I think Holosystems is looking at, this is interesting because it's a pivot a little bit from the enterprise example that I just provided, pivot from the sustainability example that I just provided, and they're looking at how do you deal with tamper-proof evidence in a conflict zone. In a conflict zone. Don't care about what conflict zone, before, during, and after a conflict. So Holosystems, you can look them up, and they are actually looking at how they use Hedera to have what we call commonly in this industry sort of the single source of truth, right? The single source of truth, and that's what they deal with, no matter where. So it's an interesting area when we're looking at what does authenticity mean, and what and how is it actually authenticated. So that is sort of the example here. We look at governance. I gave you kind of a visual of who we are in governance. You can have sort of you can look at it from a perspective of the ability to make complex decisions. You can look at it from availability to look at how you have direct democracy, or how you have what we call an autocratic scheme or anarchy. We're not in the anarchic space, definitely not. We're more in the direct democracy space. We're trying to make it as democratic as we can, and that's through the council. We put this up to kind of demonstrate, because council members have asked, well, what do you mean? Where are you at in all of this? And that's where we're at, pretty much. If you do not have governance, let me argue, because in the previous panel, what is very important is governance. You need to have governance. If you don't have a governance model, you're nothing. Really, it's very critical. This is how you deal with the management of decisions. This is how you're accountable. I think it's very critical if you think about your board of directors, how you're accountable. And that's a space that we have to look at. We struggle with that. But it's an interesting evolution. And so what I would argue, and I think that's a great opportunity for you, is if you're interested, and I think there's a lot of work, because I love what's happening with Multiverse, a lot of work to be done. Please come and see us, because we would love to have, from an enterprise perspective, a workshop with you all. Look at maybe the possibility of council membership, and maybe building on a decentralized solution. And by the way, we now have an open source officer. Because open source from the development community, because we heard how important community is really vital to the space that we're talking about. Vital, because everything is around how you write the code, how you are going to be, look at GitHub, what does it mean? Look at how you're writing your product space, how you're defining it from an open source perspective. And I think this is really the opportunity is now. And I think, I will say, the future is here already. The future is here, and thank you very much.